It's my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Ian Bernstein. He's the founder and the head of product Misty Robotics. Mr. Bernstein will talk today about robotic startup opportunities, lessons from Misty 2, and Sphero Star Wars BB-8. Please welcome Mr. Ian.
Hi, it's an honor to be here, and I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship, and hopefully at the end of the talk, some of you will be thinking about taking some of your amazing research and spinning that out into a company. So a little bit of background, I started building robots when I was 12, dropped out of school in 4th grade and basically spent all my time pulling apart TVs and VCRs and cassette players to build robots. Studied electrical engineering in college. It was a few years into college and I wanted to learn about business. And I kind of looked at the business school and decided the best way to learn about business might be to start a company. So I dropped out of school again, college, started a web design company, did that for about 4 years. Meanwhile, I was working part-time at a robotics company in Colorado where I'm based. Just to keep my engineering and robotics fresh. And one day I was at this company and I was using my original iPhone. This is 2009, and realized that the iPhone had this beautiful screen and internet connectivity and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and all these capabilities that these robots we were working on had, but the iPhone was way cheaper and like much better capabilities, much better sensors and screens and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, why can't I use the smartphone to control these robots, be the brains for the robots? So did some internet searches and quickly realized that not only was nobody controlling robots with the smartphone at the time, but nobody was controlling any physical devices. And I thought there might be a business there. So met this guy, Adam Wilson, who ended up becoming my co-founder at Sphero. We started prototyping some stuff. We put a remote starter in my car. You could start the car and roll down the windows from the phone. We controlled lights and door locks and a toy tank. And with these demo videos that we put together, we got into a seed accelerator program called Techstars. It's the first hardware company to go through the program. This was in the summer of 2010. And it was in that program we came up with this crazy robot ball idea. And it sounded way more fun than hotel door locks. So that's what we became, Sphero. This was, we released the first version of Sphero in like holidays 2011. We ended up doing a bunch of different versions of it. In 2014, we went through Techstars a second time. We were like 60-something people in the company at that point. We went through Techstars with a Disney corporate partnership program. We'd started to add character and story to our products, and the engagement was going way up. So we figured the best people in the world to learn from would be the people at Disney. And in the first couple of days of the program, we got to meet the CEO of Disney, Bob Iger. And in our 10-minute meeting, he pulls out his phone and shows us a picture of BB-8 from Star Wars and told us it was going to be the new drone in Episode 7 that was coming out the following year. And he asked us if we can make one. So we actually prototyped one that night. We had all our 3D printers and like molding supplies and everything out in LA for the program. That led to the actual product that we sold, and sold several million of those around the world in all the Apple stores and airport stores and all kinds of stuff. But it was out in LA that we started thinking about how do we get more robots out into the world, robots that are doing useful stuff for us. And, like the real BB-8 or the real R2-D2. And after we started shipping BB-8, we pulled our R&D team together and we started prototyping more advanced robots with higher level processors and natural language processing. And we worked on that for about a year and a half within Sphero. And in 2017, we spun it out into a new company called Misty Robotics. We developed the robot down there in the lower right. And that company, we started shipping Misty 2 right before the pandemic. It was like January 2020, we were just starting to get the units out to our early pre-sale customers. And that company was acquired this past October. So right now I'm actually just hanging out and re-energizing and starting to think about what my next company will be. just a little plug. So Misty on the left, we were acquired by this company, Furhat Robotics, that makes the Furhat robot on the right. If any of you are working in social robotics, definitely check out both of those robots. So why start a company? So I'll get a few different reasons. One, I think it really helps to progress robotics. Of course, research progresses robotics as well, but there's some advantages of when you turn that and commercialize it into a company. So one is economies of scale. So like, it also kind of relates to step function products. So like when they took MEMS sensors out of the lab and created these sensors, and especially with the original smartphones, when they started producing these sensors in quantities of hundreds of millions, that enabled products like Sphero. We wouldn't have been able to make that product a few years earlier without the economies of scale and the quality and the low power and everything that they had. It can also accelerate the research that you're doing when you get venture capital and you're able to hire a big team. That can accelerate the research, and it also the work you're doing, but it can also harden what you're doing. So, a lot of prototypes, right? Proof of concepts. It works in the lab. Maybe it works every 10 times, enough that you can shoot a nice video. But when you ship millions of BB-8s out into the world, everything has to work. Like you can't have, problems 1 out of 10 times. Customers would give it bad reviews and you get tons of returns. So it helps you harden the technology and think about all the crazy edge cases of how somebody might use your product and solve all those problems, so that you have a hardened product. And then just in general, like I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we found that especially in the consumer space, people can only understand so much. Like you can only step function technology so far. So even like you hear about companies that, you're like, wait, 15 years ago, there was this company X that did this exact same thing, but they failed. And now this company today is blowing up. And a lot of that's just customer readiness for the technology. So I think the more, especially in the consumer side, the more robots that we can start to get out into the world, people become familiar with robots, and we can progress the space a lot quicker. It can help change people's lives when you get these robots out. I think one of the things I'm most proud about at Sphero, which is mostly in the education space now. Just last week, I got an email from a mom of 2 kids that had started using Sphero when they were 12. This was like 6-7 years ago. And they're now applying to Cal Poly and getting into engineering, and they're on the robotics team. And there's hundreds and there's tens of thousands of kids around the world using Sphero. So definitely there's a lot of kids, and especially girls, that are getting in engineering because of playing with Sphero. And then, of course, just personally, it can be really fun. It can be extremely rewarding. And everybody here that's started a company, it's like you have the highest highs, but you also have the lowest lows. It can also be really, really hard. And it can offer a lot of fun opportunities. Like I won't name drop, but like just I've had so many crazy times meeting the most interesting people all over the world through starting these companies. So it all starts with an idea. When you think about starting a company, you want to solve a problem, and the thing you're selling is the solution to that problem. And that might sound obvious, but a lot of times, and I've done this as well, is you come up with a solution and you're not quite sure what the problem is that you're solving with that solution. So it's a solution looking for a problem. And sometimes that works with really hard technology that you're working on. Sometimes you can just solve this really, really hard problem with your solution, and a big company will buy your IP. But in general, it's best to start with the problem, not the solution that you're looking for, to fit a problem into. And then just some general other words of advice for coming up with your idea. Make sure you're solving a problem that people have. A lot of times you come up with a problem, but people don't really look at it as a real problem. If you're trying to do something better that like already has an existing solution, I think it's Peter Thiel in his book 0 to 1 that talks about, to really change somebody's behavior, your solution has to be 10 times better. So like if you have a photo album app or something that's way better than the default one on your iPhone, to convince me to like, even though it's like way better and it's easier to find your photos and like everything's organized like way better, it really has to be like close to that 10 times better to convince me to like change my habit of just opening the camera app and telling my friends about it. You also need a big market. So Bob Iger, one of our mentor meetings with him, he told us this story about trombone oil. He's like, you can come up with the best trombone oil in the world, but like you only need like a drop. And like trombone, they'll buy like one bottle in their lifetime. So you could be the best trombone oil in the world, but you're gonna sell like a few gallons of it. So look for a big market, and then because startups are so much work, you want to find something you're passionate about. So kind of the other two elements of starting a company besides the idea are the money and the team. You need money. I've seen, there's definitely companies out there that can bootstrap or work off grants and do things like that, which is nice because it's free money. But especially with robotics, it takes a lot. It takes way more money than you think. So a lot of us have to go to large angel investors or venture capital. It's definitely the better way to go because speed is a lot of times important when you're starting a company. We started in Techstars. So Techstars is a seed accelerator program. They take a certain small equity percentage of your company, but you get access to their whole mentor network, and they have talks on how to do product market fit and legal and like all the things around starting a business. We were like company 30, and now I think there's over like 3,000 companies, startups that have gone through Techstars. I know last year they did a program in Riyadh. They do corporate partnership programs. I'm not sure if they're doing one again this year. Combinator is another big one. There's hacks out of China for hardware companies. And then I saw there's one here at KAUST. I don't know much about them, but I did look through their portfolio of startups, and it looks like there's some pretty cool ones there. I'm a huge advocate for these startup programs. And then your team. So, of course, you would be one of the founders. I would recommend for robots in particular, finding a co-founder, at least one co-founder, just because it's so much work. And it's also good to, find somebody that doesn't overlap on your skill set too much. It's ideally, somebody that there's a little bit overlap that complements your skill sets in the company. So, if you're a technical person, try to find somebody that's maybe more on the business side. Or maybe if you're both technical, maybe you're in different parts of the technology. So when we started Sphero, I was more on the hardware side, and then Adam was more on the software side. So that ended up working out well. And then we brought one of our mentors in right after the program ended, who was a successful business person, and he basically became our third co-founder. And then all your initial hires, you really want like a plus people on your team, especially that first 5, 10, 15, 20 people. A couple lessons learned from the different companies. So Misty Robotics, we were a little bit of a solution looking for a problem in Misty. We wanted to build this development platform. So the robot has all these different sensors and stuff, but APIs and SDKs and documentation. And the idea is companies who don't have the knowledge or money or time to build their own robots would build their solution, their sort of app or skill on top of Misty, and then they can deploy it out into the world. I wish we had have done more research up front about what problems Misty could solve, because it's really defocusing, because you end up spending a lot of your time kind of throwing stuff against the wall once we had the product out into the world. And eventually we found groups of customers around elder care, doing computer vision for fall detection and medicine reminders and companionship and things like that. But it took a lot of time to get there. And when you also look at customers in the education space, it's a different set of features that they need. And we spread ourselves really thin, and it kind of slowed us down a lot. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time. So again, think about what your problem is, or what your group of customers is, where your product market fit is up front. Can be really helpful, and definitely something I learned from Misty. The other thing is Misty is a really hard product. I mean, it's natural language processing and mobility and structure sensor for mapping and navigation and all this stuff. And like the hardware was hard, but like so much software that had to go into it. I think we built like an MVP, minimal viable product. So you probably heard this term. And it's kind of like the minimal thing that you can get out and start getting feedback on. But a lot of MVPs sort of look like this. Like if you were to build a truck, like this is the MVP truck. Yeah, like you can move some stuff around. It has wheels, it'll drive, but there's a bunch of stuff missing. Like there's no windshield, and it's super funky. Like sort of like parts are falling off, and it can take a long time because you have to build at least the minimal truck to have an MVP of this truck. So I think if we did Misty again, what I would try is more of an LP model, which is minimal lovable product. So instead of trying to build the truck outright, how can you break that down into smaller pieces? In this example, it's like, how do you build a wheelbarrow, which is a complete product? It's not like a hack together thing. It's a complete product that you can start to learn from, start to engage with customers, and then what's the next iteration of a complete product that you can build that's much simpler than just starting with the truck. So I would have thought of Misty. How do we break Misty down into smaller pieces? Like maybe the first version isn't mobile, or maybe it's just a sensor that's really hard on Misty. Maybe the navigation system. Like build a product just around the navigation system, and then move towards the whole complete robot. So if you're thinking about like your research, like maybe it isn't the whole big giant thing that you're starting with, trying to break it down, or maybe there's a challenge, a problem, a piece of like, maybe the example in the talk earlier when he developed that controller card for the arms that was like doing the 3-finger arms, that became his product, not the whole like finger thing. So on the Sphero side, a couple lessons learned. One was like we definitely did a lot of there was a huge step function for customers. So like one, people didn't know that you could control physical things from your smartphone. So that was one. Two, it was a robot ball, which people are like, I don't know what the hell this thing is. And then three, it was like a robot ball controlled from your smartphone. Like people were so confused when we started shipping Sphero, and we spent tens of millions of dollars literally on marketing to like educate people on what a robot ball controlled from their smartphone was. Again, like, is there a way to, you really have to think about your customers and will they understand it? And it's challenging to think about that part of it because for us, it just seems so like obvious, but people just don't like get stuff sometimes. The other thing is I think our first engineering hire at Sphero was this guy, Dave High. And I had known him from a previous company, and he was kind of older, gray haired guy. And he had just like been around the block. Like he knows engineering. He's seen so many different things. And I'm pretty sure like 100% we would have failed at Sphero if it weren't for Dave. So one was his knowledge of, the architecture, the firmware. He's like electrical and firmware. And, I think he prevented just so many paths that we would have gone down just because of his experience over so many years that just saved us so much time. And the other part was like, he became this mentor for, like, he never wanted to manage anybody. He just loved engineering, but he became this mentor for everybody else on the team, the engineering team, and just like leveled everybody up. So I would say the lesson there is if you're working on like if you're working on like a dating app, like you could probably find, tons of young engineers that know how to spin up like servers and databases and like no problem. But if you're working on hard technology, like you need your Dave, you need some, gray-haired man or woman that's like just been around the block, that will level up, your technology, but also your entire team. Let's see, some suggestions on companies that you can start, just sort of based on what I'm seeing more recently on getting funded. So there's a lot of very single purpose companies. This is an example of one, Dusty Robotics. So they have this robot that, like, when you're building a building, they like lay the concrete down, and then some workers go in with chalk and they mark all the interior lines based on the architectural drawings. But there's error there. It takes a long time to get it right. So their robot just basically goes out and highly accurate prints the architectural drawing on the concrete, so then the framers can come in and build all the interior walls. But basically, very single purpose companies like this seem to be doing well right now, like companies that are picking strawberries and weeding, and like the very, very simple, not simple, like we know how hard this stuff is, but very like narrow tasks that they're solving seem to be doing well. Another thing that we're seeing is this is a company, Dishcraft. So they started basically wanting to build these robots that wash dishes for like restaurants, and they charge as a robot as a service model. So it's not, the restaurant isn't paying like $100,000 up front. They pay like a monthly fee, and it's comparable, cheaper than just even low cost labor that they're using to wash dishes. But we're finding that some of these companies, they're struggling to get into restaurants. They're actually having to go more full stack. So right now, if you go to their website and look at their video, they actually have all their robots in a big warehouse in California. And then they have all these like trucks and drivers, and they're mostly focused on events like catering. So they'll roll in with like all these, rollers of clean dishes, and they'll drop them off. And then at the end of the day, like the caterers will return the carts with all the dirty dishes, and they'll load those in the truck and take them back to their facility and wash them there, which, is probably definitely not what they wanted to be doing in their company, like having all this logistics and trucks and workers driving these trucks around and like warehouses with their robots. Like it's probably was a really hard decision for them and kind of a nightmare. But we're seeing some of these companies, again, having to go more full stack around their solution. This is Misty Robotics. So they have a robot that does price checking. Again, one more thing to look out for. So price checking, out of stock, things like that. And they're having a little bit of trouble, even though like their value prop is clear. It's way cheaper. It saves the grocery stores tons of money. It's like way faster and better than people that are working on this. But they found that a lot of the executives at grocery stores are sort of, no offense, like older people that don't really understand a lot of this technology, and especially robots, that it's, they're like, well, we've always done it this way. Why would we change the way we do things? And even though it's a clear return on investment for these grocery stores, they're having a really hard time because of the demographic of their customer. So that's something, again, to look out for. And then, of course, just individual sensors, like the talk earlier where you found that card for the controller card for the arms ended up being his product. As you're looking at your research, it might not be the actual research that becomes your product. It may be a challenge that you found along the way, and you talk to your buddies that are in this similar space, and they're like, man, this part of the project is such a pain. Like, this is such a challenge. That's like kind of a clue that there might be a product available there that not only solves a problem that you need for your bigger vision of what you want to do, but it levels up sort of the whole industry. So maybe it's some, controller for UAVs, and now that you productize that and it's awesome, and it has like the control algorithms that some of the speakers have been talking about here. And now all of a sudden, like that part's now solved, and now you can just buy this thing. And now, everybody in UAV, aircraft can like start working on more advanced stuff, like not just flying around and not running into stuff. I think you guys are working on tons and tons of really cool, awesome technology. Robots are growing, right? We all know that robots aren't going anywhere. I want the robot like Rosie from the Jetsons. I want robots everywhere in all our homes, helping us out and doing our, cleaning our houses and doing our dishes and cooking food and helping take care of us and all that good stuff. So many opportunities in robotics, and hopefully you're thinking a little bit about ways you can take the research that you're doing and turning that into a really awesome company. Thank you.
So I think we have some questions.
Thank you. Again, very interesting talk. I had a question on the supply chain side and the development. If I remember correctly, on your Sphero version, either you or your partner had to travel to Shenzhen and stay there for months to develop it. I guess, would you call it the beta version?
Yep.
How did that change from 2010 till now? Would you still have to go through the same experience of being physically located at where the production would be?
So like pre-pandemic, I would say like you have to be there. Like every hardware company that I talk to, like my number one advice is like you have to be in Asia, camped out at your factory. I spent about 3 years of my life over many trips over the last 12 years. It's definitely, I mean, even like the main engineers that are one of our factories in China, like they live in Hong Kong. They commute to mainland China every week. Those people have not, the owners of our factory have not even been to their factory since March 2020. So it's definitely changed a lot. I have a friend, Paulo, who is another social robot company, Embodied, and they were able to develop the whole thing over COVID, basically just every day on video calls, like in the US from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every night, which sounds absolutely horrible, but it's definitely possible. But I mean, if assuming post-pandemic, whatever that is, it's definitely better to be at your manufacturer for sure. Definitely saves a lot of time and shipping prototypes back and forth, and things are just so much faster. And supply chain, I have no idea. It probably depends on what parts you're getting, but I do know that some of the US companies like TI and companies like that are having a much bigger problem with supply chain than a lot of the Chinese brands. I was talking to somebody recently. So if you can use like a Chinese chip, apparently they're not having a lot of problems on that side.
Thank you for the presentation. You spoke about the readiness of the market, right? And I was wondering, I can assume you spent some time here in Saudi Arabia, right? What do you think of the readiness of the Saudi market when it comes to robotics? Or I guess the question is, what's the measure? I've always wondered, what's the measure when it comes to this? Do you just follow your intuition, or is there any equation you can use to find out that factor?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say it's kind of a step beyond, it's like a step beyond a current product. So if you can say it's like Amazon Echo plus, with this little bit added on, or like something that people are already familiar with plus like a little bit, then you can see if it works. But if there's 0 robots and you have to build like the first robot, that can be really challenging, and it might just you might have to do that, right? The first consumer robot in Saudi Arabia or something, I don't know how many Roombas and stuff you use here, but you might just have to sort of pre-plan that, it's going to take, hire really good marketing people and raise enough money that you have enough capital to do that education for the market. So that might be something you have to do. But it's definitely, I learned a lot. Like when I went to Japan specifically, I was surprised. I always pictured Japan as being this ultra futuristic technology, the latest everything. And I was surprised to learn that a lot of the technology in the US, our technology was way beyond what they had in Japan. But specifically for robots, because of their culture, I forget what it's called, but sort of objects have souls. So they really culturally, they're really open to robots and really like robots. So they're in the rest of the world, Japan is far ahead as far as adoption of robots. Not so much other technology, but yeah, I would say in general, just is it iterative on stuff that people are already familiar with.
Where do you see the Saudi market in this robot education, I guess?
I'm not sure. I think I don't know enough about sort of the home, home environment, what type of devices people have and stuff like that, and here in the KSA to answer that well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Besson.